The warrior queen who terrified Rome. In the year 43, the Romans invaded Britain, and the Britons were like, "Wait, who invited you?" And the Romans were like, "The emperor." "But this is our island." "Yes, and now it is also the emperor's island." That was basically how Rome worked. The Romans showed up with soldiers, roads, taxes, forts, paperwork, and a very confident attitude. And if you were a local king, you had two choices. You could fight Rome, or you could make a deal with Rome and hope they did not change the deal later. One British king chose the second option. His name was Prasutagus. He ruled the Iceni, a tribe in eastern Britain, around modern Norfolk. Prasutagus was not exactly independent, but he was not exactly conquered either. He was what Rome liked to call an ally, which usually meant you can keep your crown as long as you remember who is really in charge.
And Boudica is the reason this story is still remembered almost 2,000 years later. Because Rome conquered a lot of people. Rome defeated kings, burned cities, and swallowed kingdoms. But not everyone Rome defeated became a legend. Boudica did. And the weird part is that we mostly know her story because Roman writers wrote it down. Her enemies saved her name. So before we even begin, that tells us something. Rome did not remember Boudica because she was harmless. Rome remembered her because, for a very short time, she made the empire panic. Now, back to Prasutagus. He knew that his kingdom was in a dangerous position. Rome was powerful. Rome was nearby. And Rome was not famous for saying, "No worries, keep all your land, we have enough." So when Prasutagus died, he tried to solve the problem with a will. He left his kingdom jointly to his two daughters and to the Roman Emperor Nero. That sounds strange, but the idea was simple.
"Please do not destroy my family." And Rome looked at the will and said, "Interesting. We will take everything." The Romans ignored the spirit of the deal. They seized land. They humiliated Iceni nobles. They treated the royal family like conquered property. And according to the Roman historian Tacitus, they publicly beat Boudica and sexually assaulted her daughters. This was the moment Rome made a very expensive mistake. Because Rome thought humiliation would create obedience. But sometimes humiliation creates the exact opposite. Sometimes it creates a person who has nothing left to lose. And Boudica was not alone. The Iceni were angry. But another nearby tribe, the Trinovantes, were angry too. Their old center, Londinium, which is modern Colchester, had become a Roman colony. Roman veterans had settled there. A giant temple to Emperor Claudius had been built. To many Britons, it was like putting up a giant sign that said, "Congratulations, you lost." And the locals probably had to help pay for it. So when Boudica rose up, many people were ready to join her. This is how revolts grow. At first, it is one family. Then it becomes one tribe. Then another tribe says, "Actually, we hate Rome too." And suddenly, Rome has a problem. But here is where the timing gets very bad for the Romans. The Roman governor of Britain was Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, and when the revolt began, he was not in eastern Britain. He was far away in the west, attacking the island of Mona, modern Anglesey. Mona was important to British resistance and to the Druids. So Suetonius was busy trying to crush one center of resistance while another one exploded behind him. That is bad scheduling. It is like leaving your house to fix a leak and coming home to find the kitchen on fire. Boudica's first major target was Londinium,
The place that symbolized occupation. The people inside asked for help, and a Roman official named Catus Decianus sent about 200 lightly armed men. 200 against a growing tribal revolt. That is not a rescue force. That is a strongly worded suggestion. Boudica's army attacked. Londinium had weak defenses. The last defenders hid inside the temple of Claudius. For 2 days they held out. Then the temple fell, and the city was destroyed. Think about what that meant. The temple that celebrated Rome's conquest became the place where Rome's confidence collapsed. The city that was supposed to show Roman power became a warning. Boudica had not just burned a town, she had burned the idea that Rome was untouchable. And then things got worse for Rome. The 9th Legion marched to stop the rebellion. Now, a Roman legion was not supposed to be easy to beat. Legions were the main reason Rome had an empire. They were basically the ancient world's way of saying, please stop resisting. But Boudica's revolt was not a small riot. When the Ninth came forward, its infantry was overwhelmed. The commander escaped with some cavalry, but much of the infantry was destroyed. So now Boudica had burned a Roman colony and smashed a major Roman force. And this is the part where every Roman official in Britain probably started having a very bad day, because rebellions are dangerous. But successful rebellions are contagious. If one town burns, maybe it is a disaster. If a legion gets destroyed, it becomes a question. Can Rome still hold Britain? Suetonius rushed back from the west, and he moved toward Londinium, modern London. But this was not the London we know today. No skyscrapers, no underground trains, no people paying way too much rent to live in a room the size of a Roman storage closet. Londinium was a young Roman town, but it was already important. It had merchants.
It was the kind of place Rome wanted to grow, and Boudica was coming. Suetonius looked at the situation and made a brutal decision. He did not have enough soldiers to defend the city. If he stayed and lost, the province might be finished. So he abandoned Londinium. He took with him the people who could leave, but many stayed behind. Maybe they could not leave. Maybe they would not leave. Maybe they thought Rome would protect them. Rome did not. Boudica's army arrived, and Londinium burned. Before London became the capital of a world empire, it was a Roman town destroyed by a British queen. That is a pretty wild career change for a city. After Londinium came Verulamium, modern St. Albans. That city was also destroyed. So now we have Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium. 3 major Roman settlements, 3 fires. 3 messages to the empire. Britain is not quiet. Britain is not conquered. Britain is not done. Rome did not rule only with soldiers. Rome ruled with confidence. It wanted people to look at Roman roads, Roman temples, Roman coins, Roman laws, and Roman soldiers and think, this is permanent. Boudica attacked that feeling. Every burning town said, maybe it isn't. That idea was more dangerous than the fire itself, because fire destroys buildings, but an idea can destroy obedience. And if one province thinks Rome can be beaten, another province might start thinking too. Empires do not like that. At this point, Boudica was winning, but there was a problem hiding inside her success. Her army was getting bigger. It had anger. It had momentum. It had people who had seen Roman power bleed. But bigger is not always better, especially if your army is full of warriors, families, wagons, animals, and people who came to watch what they think will be the final victory. Meanwhile,
And Roman soldiers were very good at one specific thing: turning chaos into a machine. The Britons had numbers. The Romans had discipline. The Britons had fury. The Romans had formation. The Britons had momentum. The Romans had shields, javelins, short swords, and a very serious commitment to standing in straight lines. So Suetonius did not try to beat Boudica in open ground. That would be a terrible idea. If your enemy has huge numbers, do not fight in a place where huge numbers are useful. So he chose the battlefield carefully. The exact location is still debated, but Roman sources describe a narrow approach with woods behind the Roman line. That was perfect for Suetonius. Boudica's army could not easily surround him. The Romans could hold a narrow front, and suddenly, Boudica's massive numbers mattered less. This is the key to the battle. Rome did not need more men. Rome needed less space. On one side stood Suetonius and his.
They knew what had happened to the Ninth Legion. They knew that if they lost, Britain might be lost. On the other side stood Boudica and her army. Roman writers say she rode in a chariot with her daughters. Maybe that image is partly legend, but it is powerful for a reason. A queen who had been humiliated by Rome was now standing in front of an army ready to punish Rome. And if you were in her army, you might have believed this was the final moment. Camulodunum had fallen. Londinium had burned. Verulamium had burned. The Ninth had been beaten. Why should this Roman line be any different? That confidence is exactly what made the battle so dangerous. Because sometimes, the most dangerous moment in a revolt is not when it is weak. It is when it believes it cannot lose. The battle began. Boudica's forces advanced. The Romans waited. And waiting was one of the things Rome did best. They did not need to look dramatic. They did not need to scream louder. They needed to let the Britons come closer. Then the Roman javelins flew. Imagine thousands of Britons pushing forward, the space getting tighter, the Roman line staying still. Then heavy javelins crashing into shields, bodies, and momentum. After the javelins came the Roman advance, shields forward, short swords ready, step by step, not as a crowd, as a machine. Boudica's numbers, which had been so powerful in open movement, became crowded and compressed. The battlefield turned against her. And behind the Britons were the wagons, families, animals, people who had come expecting to watch a victory. But now those wagons blocked escape. The army that had seemed unstoppable became trapped by its own confidence. This is the brutal turn of the story. Boudica did not lose because she lacked courage. She did not lose because her army lacked anger. She lost because Rome forced her anger into a narrow place and met it with discipline. Ancient casualty numbers are probably exaggerated. Roman writers loved dramatic numbers almost as much as Romans loved roads. But the result is clear. Boudica's revolt was crushed. What happened to Boudica after the battle is uncertain. Tacitus says she took poison. Cassius Dio says she died from illness. Other traditions are even less clear. There is no confirmed grave, no final speech, no British record telling us what she thought in the end. She disappears from history into fog. But that fog helped make her a legend. Rome survived. Rome kept Britain. Roman roads, towns, laws, and soldiers stayed for centuries. So technically, Boudica lost. But memory is strange, because the Roman governor won the battle, but Boudica won the story. People remember the queen in the chariot, the mother who was wronged, the tribes rising together, the burning of Roman towns, the moment when the empire looked vulnerable. And that is why her story is still.
Her revolt was violent. Cities were destroyed. Civilians died. Rome's treatment of her family was brutal. Her revenge was brutal too. This is not a clean story about good people and bad people. History is usually messier than that. It is a story about power, humiliation, revenge, freedom, discipline, and what happens when an empire thinks conquered people have accepted their place. Boudica showed Rome something it never liked to see. She showed that an empire could take land without taking loyalty. She showed that a beaten people could still rise. She showed that a province Rome thought it owned could turn into a battlefield almost overnight. And she showed that the greatest power in the world could still be frightened by one woman who refused to kneel. The Romans won the final battle, but they did not erase her. They wrote her down. They remembered her voice, her hair, her fury, her army, her destruction, her defeat. That is the final twist. Boudica's story survived through the empire she fought. Her enemies became the keepers of her legend, and every time her name is spoken, the old fear returns for a moment. The fear that even Rome could burn. The fear that conquest is never complete. The fear that one wounded queen could turn a province into a rebellion. Boudica did not destroy Rome, but she terrified it. And sometimes, in history, that is enough to become immortal.